Today's workshop is the new adverse effect rule. I'm excited to introduce you to Ernie Wheeler, educational consultant at the Vermont Agency of Education. Ernie is a former school psychologist and has been a member of the Agency of Education's special education team for the past 24 years. In his current semi retired role, he provides technical assistance to the field and parents, as well as processing the educational surrogate parent appointments on behalf of the Agency of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I guess I can start sharing my screen.
Yes.
Okay. So let's begin. This is the adverse effect presentation. The title of the was the new adverse effect. It's not so new anymore. We've had it in effect now for a couple of years. It was supposed to be the year previous to its implementation, but COVID and the need to do more training around the state required us to delay it a bit. But this is the adverse effect as it is now within the state. And today I'm going to share information about our special education processes specific to the eligibility determination, which adverse effect is a piece of that. Especially, this is criteria 2, or what used to be called gate 2 in the past. As Karen said, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but if it's pertinent to what we're talking about at the moment, please feel free to raise your hand virtually and be able to jump in and ask that question. I'm not opposed to that. One of the things that we have put out and is on our website at the agency is the K through 12 Special Education Evaluation Implementation Guide. And Section 6 deals with eligibility determination. And that's a good thing for professionals to look at in terms of developing evaluation plans.
Okay. Ernie, your slides are not actually advancing.
Oh.
It's still on the title slide.
It's advancing on my screen, but it's not advancing on yours. Okay, so maybe it's going to be necessary for you guys to, and I'll just tell you when we need to switch.
Oh, wait, now you are on your 4th slide.
Okay.
Okay, well, maybe it's working right now. You are on the slide that says Vermont Special Education Initial Evaluation Process.
Okay, that's good. Then I'll just go do it from here and see if it continues to work this way. The Vermont Education Initial Evaluation Process really has 4 steps. The first one is the initial referral. Referral is made from either parents or professionals or sometimes even an agency to the school district. The school district, once they receive that, has 15 days to then act upon it, which means they either hold an evaluation planning team meeting or they send out a Form 7 to deny the evaluation because they don't see the same issues at school. But those are the 2 options within 15 days. The assessment process then happens as a result of an evaluation planning team meeting where the team decides how to evaluate that student, what disability categories they're going to be looking at, and what evaluation assessment tools might be used. Not necessarily naming the specific tool because we leave that up to the professionals, but it would list the professional that is going to be responsible for doing those particular tests. At the end of the evaluations, then there's an eligibility determination to determine whether the student meets the criteria for eligibility for special education services. And then if indeed they do, another 30 days then happens for the planning of the services. Let me try to go to the next. Are you seeing eligibility criterion 2 now?
Yes.
Okay, right. So adverse effect is criteria 2. Criteria one was the disability determination, but adverse effect kind of goes hand in hand, and especially in the federal rules regarding the disability. When we talk about adverse effect, sometimes we say adverse effect or adversely affecting. They're used, like the slide says here, interchangeably. And it means pretty much the same thing, that there's a negative impact on some basic skill that the child has shown deficits in. It doesn't have to be substantial, significant, or marked, but it's something more than just a minor or a hindrance to the student's academic or functional skills day. We prove adverse effect by assessments, by observations, by the results of their performance in school throughout the day. And it typically is in comparison to grade level peers, typical grade level peers. In the old days, prior to this rule change, it had to be a student that fell in the lowest 15th percentile on a standardized assessment. And that was removed. We were the only state doing it that particular way. In other states, adverse effect is again something that you have to prove, but never did any other states operationalize it the way that Vermont had. So let's go to the eligibility for children ages 6 through 21. A child shall be eligible for special education if he or she has one or more of the disabilities described in Rules 2362.1, except for two categories you don't have where you don't have to prove adverse effect, and that is deaf blindness and specific learning disability. And that's because in specific learning disability, it's built into the definition of the disability itself, that you have to have a deficit in a basic skill. Deaf blindness, because of the difficulties the students has with learning, that becomes an automatic in terms of adverse effect on educational performance. Once you've proven the disability and the adverse effect, then the other thing that you need to look at is the student needs special education services to access and benefit his or her educational program. This is in many states the bigger discussion. When we had the rule that adverse effect needed to be the lowest 15th percentile, in many cases there was so much work put into proving the adverse effect that sometimes the need for special education or where the student was best to get their needs met was already pretty decided. And so sometimes in the evaluation planning reports, what we saw under need was, does the student need specialized instruction? The answer was just yes. Rather than considering other avenues that might be available within the school district other than special education.
So, Ernie, I have a question.
Sure.
Should the same age peer comparison be to only students in the same classroom or school district or nationally?
It can be broadened if necessary, because each class has a different makeup, and so a third grade class may be not typical peers. They may be a higher learning group. They might be a lower learning group. So you want to compare that to a larger group if necessary, or nationally if you're using particular tests that give you that type of criteria.
Okay, and actually, that's a follow up there where the person is saying, I have experienced a lot of schools saying that the entire or the majority of the grade is behind due to COVID.
That's entirely possible. And so you want to look at it in comparison to where that student stacks up to his peers, and it'd be harder then to do a look at national scores because every school was different during the COVID period. So in that case, you may want to look at what happened within either your school in different other third grade classes, if we're using a third grade example, or within the district, because that would be more meaningful than looking outside of your district or even looking nationally at that point. The evaluation planning team, and I'm sorry that the abbreviation is here without explaining what EPT means, but the evaluation planning team must identify areas of adverse effect due to the disability in basic skill areas. And I'll give you the basic skill areas in a minute here. Using a range of either diagnostic assessments or performance data that comes from the classroom. With that information, the evaluation planning team and eventually the IEP team consider the academic and non-academic aspects of a child's functioning. And here are the basic skills. Basic skills include basic reading, reading fluency, reading comprehension, mathematical reasoning, mathematical computation, written expression, oral expression, listening comprehension, motor skills, and what we added when we changed the rule, we added functional skills to the list of basic skills. The only thing I would like to say in terms of these 10, reading fluency currently is only used for identifying for use with students with a specific learning disability. But we're talking about that at the agency in terms of where we're going to take that next, whether it's then going to be opened up to other disability categories as well, which I think was the original intent. But when it came across from the feds, they only talked about it in terms of SLD at that point. Here are ways to, again, measure the adverse effect. Many of these are things that were in place before when we had the lowest 15th percentile rule. They're still in effect and still ways of measuring adverse effect. One of the requirements that we no longer have is that the previous rules require that you use at least 3 of these measures. What we're requiring now that it's more than 1, but it doesn't have to be 3. So the multiple ways of measuring. One way of measuring is the individually administered nationally normed achievement test, typically given by a professional. Again, my former life as a school psychologist, I gave many of those. Sometimes it can be a special educator who provides those that particular evaluation. And that gives you an idea of where the student stacks up and compared to other students nationally. Group administered nationally normed achievement tests are ones typically taken in the classroom. Again, sometimes school districts don't have that available to them, and so it's just one option if it is available. Reports of progress, such as grades, progress reports of the students already on an IEP, they get periodic progress reports, or other measures of academic proficiency that happen within the classroom. Curriculum-based measures, students' performance over an extended period of time, again, is a part of this adverse effect. Criterion reference assessments, tests that aren't standardized, they don't have national norms, but they may have norms within the classroom, or you can tell where the student ranks within their classroom, within their school, within their school district. And then there's other measures of performance, such as student work samples, language samples, if you're looking at a speech language issue, portfolios for the students with emotional disturbance. Sometimes the disciplinary evidence is important to look at, students' attendance, social, behavior, and emotional observations, which goes along with that new category of functional behavior. Again, here's where we're talking about the adverse effect needs to be more than just a minor or short-term issue. It's one that happens over time, in spite of things that you've tried to provide for the student to accommodate or provide alternative instruction for the student. The student still shows that adverse effect in that particular basic skill. And when we talk about that, we talk about that a research-based intervention was tried with the student with fidelity. It means that if it was meant to be given to the student 3 days a week, the student got it 3 days a week to truly measure, its effect. If it was meant to be 3 days a week and it was only given 1 day a week, twice during a 6-week span, then it's going to be hard to tell whether or not that intervention had the impact that you wanted it to have. Also, there are exclusionary factors for eligibility, and a student cannot be determined eligible under the rules if the decision is if the determinant factor for the disability is due to lack of instruction. In many cases, some of the students we've seen that have come in from foreign countries have not been involved in education for up to 1 to 2 years prior to coming to Vermont. And so that lack of instruction is something where you don't identify the student, even though they're functioning fairly low at that point. It's because they haven't been given the proper instruction. And so you need to see how instruction impacts that student before you identify them. It talks about instruction in reading, but then it goes on to talk about the areas that are of concern, or math. Or limited English proficiency was another issue, which again, with foreign students, or the child does not otherwise meet the eligibility criteria of the rule. You don't find a significant, deficit in a basic skill area, or they don't meet the eligibility requirements for speech language impairment, or they don't meet the eligibility requirements for intellectual disabilities. So to determine if adverse effect is present, the evaluation planning team must identify the adverse effect, areas of adverse effect due to the disability in the basic skill areas. So when you're doing the planning meeting, when you get the adverse effect section, you list areas that you need that the team wants to look at and explore as possibilities for the adverse for determining the adverse effect. That may be a list of 3, 4, 2, 1 areas of adverse effect. And in the areas of adverse effect, it needs to be documented in that section of the evaluation plan report that at least one area of basic skill meets the adverse effect requirement. If the plan is to look at 5 of those, again, only one needs to be documented in that section. But if that documentation doesn't prove adverse effect, then you keep looking at the other 4 until you exhausted all 4. If you find the first one to then prove adverse effect, you can either do the other 4 in this section, or you can save the other 4 to the needs section of the evaluation planning report. The only requirement is that you at least do one adverse effect and prove adverse effect in one basic skill area to document that on your evaluation plan, and then address the other adverse effect areas of concern in the needs section. Again, here are the exclusionary factors in terms of when adverse effect is not present. And I guess the third bullet here is the important one, as I was saying before. For determinant of adverse effect, the state regulations no longer require a number of measures, but you should use multiple pieces of evidence in order to prove the adverse effect. So more than one, but no longer required to have at least three. This is the Form 2, which is typically seen in all of the evaluation plan and reports. There are different computer programs around the state that do the paperwork for special education. This is the one that we recommended, we put out. Most of them use this form or a close proximity to this form. And it just divides the adverse effect section into these areas of measures that you might have used to prove the adverse effect. Excuse me a minute, I need to take a drink. Thank you. The first one has to do with the standard nationally normed individually administered tests. The next one is the group test. Third one is the any reports presented by the parent or guardian for outside evaluations. When an outside evaluation is brought in by the parent, the evaluation planning team must consider the evaluation, but they also have the right to do their own testing or to not take into account the evaluation that was brought in, but they at least must consider it. The child, the fourth one has the child's performance in comprehensive assessments, such as classroom performance on assessments. If there's any information there. Criterion reference tests. And again, number 6 has to do with work products, language samples. 7 has to do with disciplinary evidence. In filling this out, sometimes it's not appropriate for all students, and that's why there's an NA at the end of every one of these categories, because in some categories, it may not be appropriate to the students or have anything to do with their adverse effect. Number 8 has to do with attendance patterns. 9 has to do with social behavior, emotional, and 10 just allows you for some other measure that maybe we haven't even thought of that may be pertinent to these students' adverse effect story. And finally, the Form 2 at the end talks about those exclusionary factors again that would not allow the student to be found eligible. One of the reminders that we like to give when we're doing these trainings is especially during reevaluations, not just when the student is being evaluated for the first time, but just a reminder that the student is currently performing well as a result of existing supports and services. The evaluation planning team should describe in their report for a reevaluation how the effect of the services allows the student to perform well within the classroom, and you don't take away those supports just to prove they continue to have the adverse effect. You use your professional judgment to say that indeed, if you took those services away, the student would then demonstrate an adverse effect. Before we get into the case studies, I'll open it up to any questions that people might have.
Okay, I see Jessica has raised her hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ernie. I was trying to recollect, I can't remember the period of time between, so a parent gives let's say that in this scenario, a parent gives a request for consideration of referral. The EPT, evaluation and planning team meets. And the length of time that a school has to complete the assessment process. Can you remind me what that period of time is?
The clock starts when the parent signs the consent form and gives it to the school district. So when the school district receives the signed consent for the evaluation, the 60-day clock begins then.
Thank you.
No others at this time? Okay, so I'll move on into some of these case studies. These are case studies from around the country. We did that only because this adverse effect rule was new to us, and we wanted to hear what other states were hearing in terms of some of their hearing officer decisions. So this was a student assessed in 8th grade, but was found ineligible. In 9th grade, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. In 10th grade, he received poor grades because he did not turn in homework and was frequently tardy and absent. In 10th grade, he passed both portions of the state required testing. A 504 plan was developed for the student, with only minor accommodations recommended by a private psychologist. The parents then requested an assessment in September of student's 11th grade year. Student admitted homework was not a priority and he was late at times because he would lose track of time. Student loves soccer and was never late for soccer practice. School district again found the student ineligible. The hearing officer for student 1 determined that the student's attention deficit disorder did not adversely affect his educational performance because his motivation was the primary factor behind his failing grades, rather than his attention deficit disorder. The student was capable of arriving to class on time and completing his work, but he refused to do so. Case study number 2. The student here was 16 years old and had type 1 diabetes. Student had a history of tardiness, absences, failing to turn in homework and long-term assignments throughout elementary and middle school. In 9th grade, the student failed almost all classes. In previous years, general education intervention had been attempted. Academic testing, such as the Woodcock-Johnson 3, all were in the average range. STAR scores were proficient. Student doctor provided input that his diabetes affects his concentration because of blood sugar fluctuations. And in 10th grade, the student passed both sections of the state required testing. The hearing officer in this case determined that the student's diabetes adversely affected his educational performance, but because it caused him to be absent or tardy from school and caused him to fail or have difficulty with completing or turning in class and homework assignments. So in this case, the student did have an adverse effect. The question then for the student would be, does he have a need for special education services, or can his needs be met through a 504 program? Case study number 3. A student was a 12-year-old student with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He became eligible for special education at 6 years old under other health impaired. Student was performing well in school, receiving all B's and a C- in math. School district assessment found the student's academics were in the above average to high average range. Parents reported difficulty with homework and social skills related to the student's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. STAR testing showed the student to be in the advanced range. Parents reported that the student would take 4 hours to complete his homework. Student removed his ADHD ADHD medication patch when he went home because it adversely affected his appetite and caused insomnia. Additional facts. Assessment demonstrated a discrepancy between parent and teacher ratings on the Connor rating scale, which the assessor did not analyze or explain. Assessor reported parent input in their report, but did not analyze and explain the input. District wanted to exit the student from special education and file for a due process hearing. Parents did not agree to the exit from special education. So the hearing officer determined the student's ADHD adversely affected his educational performance because it prevented the student from focusing and attending to his work, from timely completing his homework, and assessment report did not give proper weight to the above effects on the student's ADHD. The hearing officer further stated the proper and timely completion of homework was an important aspect of the student's ability to access and benefit from his education because homework comprised as much as 25% of his grade in one of his classes. The student's difficulty focusing and paying attention prevented him from remaining in an advanced math class. Case study number 4. This student is 14 years old with high-functioning autism, an anxiety disorder, phobias regarding germs, a depressive disorder, and scoliosis of the spinal column. In 4th grade, the student moved into the school district and was determined eligible as a speech-language impaired student. After 30 days, the I team in October 2004 found the student no longer needed speech and language services, but was eligible under a specific learning disability. At the beginning of 5th grade, the school district found that the student no longer needed special education and related services to benefit from his education and exited him. Parents consented to the exit from special education. 2 years later, the school district agreed to assess the student at the parents' request. Parents were concerned that despite students' academic success, he had problems including an obsession with perfection and deficient social skills that interfered with his ability to be successful in school and in the community. Parents informed the school district they suspected the student had Asperger's syndrome. Student was placed on a Section 504 plan. Student was academically successful in all his classes. His speech and language skills were within the average range for his chronological age and development, and he did not demonstrate autistic-like behaviors in 2 or more areas as required by law. The school district found him eligible. This was a California case, which then goes to the regional center if the parents disagree with the school district's decision. The regional center found student eligible for services under autism. The parents presented the regional center assessment to the school district. The district reassessed the student and again found the same reasons found the student ineligible. A private assessor found the student eligible under the autism disability, and a parent's filed for a due process hearing, which led to the hearing officer's decision, which said that the child is eligible for special education if an IEP determines the child meets one of the educational eligibility categories, and if the IEP team determines that the adverse effect of the disability cannot be corrected without special education and related services. That is, that the degree of impairment requires instruction, services, or both, which cannot be provided through modification of the regular school program, which is typically what a Section 504 plan does. Thus, if the student exhibited any combination of the above autistic-like behaviors during the relevant timeframes and the disorder adversely affects his educational performance to the extent that special education is required, the student would meet the eligibility requirement. Also, the hearing officer considered, as part of the case study for number 4, examined standard measures, grades over time, which were A's, star testing, Section 504 accommodations, whether the content of the curriculum was modified in any way by the Section 504 plan, and the student's ability to relate and interact with his peers. And a hearing officer determined the student did not meet eligibility under autistic-like, and even if he did, there was no adverse effect on educational performance. He did not require special education, and the student was not eligible for special education services. So those are the case studies. These are just tips that we remind people in terms of analyzing adverse effect. To look at all forms of academic performance, the standardized measures, the grades, the continuous progress monitoring results, any teacher-made classroom examinations, and samples of the student's work. Sometimes it's a sample of the work can be with assistance, without assistance. Sometimes there's a glaring difference between the two. Work that they did at home, work that they did in school can also be looked at. Work completion issues, such as the amount of time that it takes them to do their homework or the amount of time that it takes them to do their classwork, and determine why the work is not being completed in a timely manner or in comparison to their peers. Truancy issues and absences, is there a reason why? Is there a pattern to the absences? Does it happen every Friday? Does it happen every Monday? Does the student go to the nurse's office, to avoid going to a subject that they're not having success in, such as math or some other, program that requires a great deal of reading or a great deal of concentration. Disciplinary issues, again, why? Is it related in any way to the disability? And what effect does that have on educational performance? And the effects of grades through Section 504 plan supports. Again, it goes back to what I was saying before, in terms of if the 504 plan has accommodations and modifications that are enabling the student to perform well in the classroom, you don't take those away to then prove that the student has an adverse effect. If they're doing well, keep them in place. And also the motivation of the student, as we saw in one of the case studies, that motivation was the factor that the hearing officer determined the student was not eligible for special education. And these are some resources that we have available on our website, and also certainly one of the biggest resources is the people that I'm sitting in the building today with, is the Vermont Family Network. Again, use those, go to the website and take a look at those. Those are good documents to look at. Again, if you have questions, certainly you can email our new director of special education, Cassie Santo, or myself. Email is probably the best way to get a hold of us these days when we're not always in the office. And thank you. I'll open it up for more questions.
Okay, so Ernie, I think I'll just do a quick a clarification question, and then we'll get to the evaluations.
Okay.
So is the time frame for reevaluations also 60 days, or is that just for initial evaluations?
No, that's just for initial evaluations. The time frame for reevaluations is you have to have the reevaluation done and the meeting held prior to the triennial review date.
Okay,
so you can start at any time during that 3-year period, but it has to be done before the end of the 3-year date.
Okay, so thanks for sharing the information. Before we get to the other questions that are probably a little meatier, Rachel has just put the evaluation link in the chat. So I'm just going to give everyone a short pause, about half a minute, to ask that those who are on to do the evaluation for the workshop so we can make improvements, fulfill our grant requirements. So again, I'll give you about half a minute or a minute or so, and then I'll get into the questions, both in the chat as well as the ones that were submitted prior. Okay, yeah, Ernie, you can go ahead and stop sharing too. So then with the Q&A, it's
All
easier
right.
to see people. And so I'll go ahead and pull up some of the questions. I think we have an overlap. Yes, someone had asked about the rule change affecting disability determination for pre-K that I see in the chat. I'm wondering if you can offer some information on the eligibility process for 3 to 5 year olds. So that's the same age.
Yeah. For 3 to 5 year olds, that hasn't changed. The only thing that would be different is if you're going to use a 6 to 12 to 21 disability category. In that case, you would have to prove adverse effect if you're going to use that category for a student, for a child who's 3 to 5 years old.
Okay. Then I have another question.
I'm sorry. So I was the one asking the question. And I also, it was more pertaining towards the 5 domains that we do test in early education. I was wondering if it's necessary to test in all 5 domains when there's only concerns in 1 or 2 of them. It has nothing to do with the adverse effect, really, because we don't
Right,
really
because
yeah.
for 3 to 5 year olds, you don't, if you're using developmental delay as your category, you don't have to prove adverse effect.
Right. But I
as
was
far
wondering
as
if you,
testing, as far as testing in all 5 domains, I think that would be up to the evaluation planning team, in considering what they want to assess. But I think it's good to have all 5 domains so that you can prove that, these are the areas that the student has deficits and these are areas that the student does not.
Okay, I have another question that came in before. What is the state's obligation to take away already covered Katie Beckett waivers?
Well, Katie Beckett is Medicaid funded for students 19 years old and below that are pretty much homebound because of medical reasons. As I understand Katie Beckett. And so I think that's a better question for the Medicaid people. When you sign the consent for the school to bill Medicaid, that may have an effect on the monies available through Katie Beckett, but I'm not sure. So that would be a question I would ask, Medicaid people.
Okay, and there is an education Medicaid unit at the Agency of Education.
Okay, there is.
Okay. Then a question, are we speaking of the adverse effect laws related to 2022, or has there been a new adverse effect law?
No, there's not a new one. This is the new one for us.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. I think it was 2022 and then it got delayed a year.
It got delayed. It got delayed a year because of need to train people around the state.
So, if a question about how to navigate the IEP process in independent schools.
Well, the first question I guess I have in terms of that is, how was the student placed in the independent school? Were they parentally placed? Were they placed there by school choice, or were they placed there by a school district? If the school district placed them there, or this parent had school choice, then the LEA, or the responsible district for the IEP, remains the district of the student's residence. If indeed they were placed there, if they were unilaterally placed there by a parent who didn't have school choice, then it would be the responsibility of the school district where that independent school is located, in collaboration with the independent school.
Okay, thanks. Another question, can you describe the steps parents would take if a school team decided the child wasn't eligible for special ed? What are the steps of appeal and what are the timeframes associated with each step?
If a district finds a student is ineligible, parents should receive, the report and a summary that indicates that the reasons why they were found ineligible. Parents then have a right to go to request an independent educational evaluation, which is making a request of the school district. They should have a list of area evaluators that you can go to, or you can contact the Vermont Family Network and get a list of evaluators in your area. That evaluation, the independent educational evaluation, should be at no cost to the parent. It should be borne by the district. The district either says yes to the evaluation, or they request an impartial hearing to determine that their evaluation was comprehensive and complete. If indeed you disagree with the decision of the district, you can also take that to mediation by requesting mediation from the Agency of Education, or by requesting a due process hearing from the Agency of Education.
So, yeah, we actually don't maintain a list of
Oh, okay.
evaluators. Yeah, I mean, we
All
can
right.
refer to
Oh,
parents,
yeah,
but we
okay.
don't, to places, but we don't actually maintain a list because those are
Oh,
always
they
difficult
can
to.
they can contact me then. I know plenty around the state. So.
Okay. So if a school reevaluates a student and finds they are no longer eligible for special education, the parent disagrees and asks for an IEE. Should the student continue to be supported by an IEP while that process plays out?
I would say yes. It's similar to the stay put regulation when a parent requests mediation or a due process hearing. I would allow the student to continue until that is resolved.
Okay. What can families do if the school rejects a request for an evaluation?
The school district may, but they're not required to, request a due process hearing to have a binding decision determine whether or not the evaluation will move forward. Again, they may do that, but they're not required to do that. If the parent says no, the parent says no, and the district really only has one recourse, and that is to request the due process hearing to go before a hearing officer and plead their case for the evaluation. And the parents plead their case why they don't want the evaluation, and the hearing officer makes a binding decision.
Okay, so I think the question is okay. All right. Okay, I'm just looking at the question again. What can families do if the school rejects a request?
Oh, if the school rejects a
Right.
request.
Yeah, it was, not the other way around. Yes.
Well, again,
Yeah.
those parents can request mediation or a due process hearing. to do exactly the same thing the school would have to do, plead their case why they would like an evaluation completed, and the school district, plead their case as to why an evaluation isn't warranted at that time.
So then this is almost like a follow-up. What is the difference between mediation and a due process hearing?
Mediation is voluntary on both the part of the parents and the school. So either party could say, we're not going to mediation. And in mediation, a trained mediator tries to broker an agreement between the school district and the parent. If that doesn't result in an agreement, which sometimes it doesn't, you then have the right to go on to the due process hearing. But it could be resolved in mediation before it even goes to due process. And due process is a more legal, informal process where a hearing officer hears both sides of the equation. You're allowed to have attorneys at a due process. So the school, if they have one, the parents can have one. Neither side has to have one, but they are allowed to have one. In mediation, if the parent doesn't have a lawyer present, the school district cannot have a lawyer present.
So where do the mediators come from, Ernie?
The mediators are trained by the state, and we have a list of them at the Agency of Education, and they're just picked from that list. They just go down the list and they rotate. I don't know how many there are at this point, but that all comes from the legal office. You file the request with the legal team, and they pick a mediator.
Okay, so it's a random picking.
It is, yeah. It's a short list. There's not many of them, but it's random.
And when a due process hearing is initiated, it would be very unusual for the school not to have legal representation, right? Because even though you state it isn't necessary.
Yeah. It's and it's one of the things we talk about at the state all the time. It's hard for parents to find good legal representation. But as was explained to me by the legal team, it's not required that they have legal representation. It's up to them. It's I think in their best interest. But again, hard finding people who do that nowadays is difficult.
Yeah, because I would say it's very unusual for a school district not to have legal representation. So that would put the parent automatically.
I can't think of a situation where the school district doesn't.
Right. So yeah, you are right in that there's very little choice on the parent side to be able to find an attorney. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question, can we assume that the mediators are well versed in special education requirements and law?
That was part of their training, whether or not they have the extensive experience that everyone has. And sometimes mediators come to us and say, I'm not quite sure this particular regulation. And so they'll call us, during their mediation. They'll take a break in the mediation and call us. But for the most part, yeah, that's part of their training is to be versed in special ed law. But again, they're probably not going to know every nuance of special education law, just like I don't. And I've been at this now for, 19 years as a school psychologist and 24 years at the state. So I've been at this for 43 years, and there's always something new that comes up. Such as Katie Beckett.
So yeah, we're almost at
I'm going to learn more about that this week.
Okay, so I see. I was just going to say we probably have time for just one or two more questions. So oftentimes schools will say that students and IEPs have made adequate progress on their goals. Is that a standard for adequate progress?
Yeah, there's the adequate progress is as measured by the school district. The question would be those goals and objectives that are in the IEP. There should be a part of the IEP that talks about the standard for the grade level that the student is in, and then there should be a standard that the student is working on. So they may be making adequate progress toward their goal, toward their objective within that. But the question would be, are they making adequate progress toward the grade level goal, which may be a higher standard? And that may be a question to then ask. They may be doing fine with the work they're doing and making adequate progress, but is it getting them closer to the grade level goal that we're looking for?
Okay, so we might have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question? You can unmute yourself.
Squeeze it in. I'm not going anywhere.
Well, if not, I think Ernie had his contact information on the slides that you will get after. Okay, so I think we're going to end pretty much. So thank you so much, Ernie, for literally being with us today in our VFN offices. So
Thank
for
you.
everyone else, we have many more interesting workshops coming up. You can find details on the homepage of our website, and there are links to previously recorded ones. We have a lot of information on our website. Getting connected with us is easy. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you are a parent. So we are here to help. Contact us by phone or email, and thank you, everyone, and have a great day.